This is WFYI News Now. It's February 5th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, legislation that could provide more transparency as the FSSA makes changes to an important Medicaid waiver. A rally to support a measure to repeal Indiana's death penalty. And the impact Governor Mike Braun's proposed changes to property taxes could have on education.
Prove it that you didn't salt away a lot, that you didn't overburden the taxpayer by maybe making investments in buildings that weren't needed or other things that weren't essential.
Those stories coming up. But first, outspoken Indianapolis City County Councilor Jesse Brown has been kicked out of the Democratic Caucus. Brown commented on the move after Monday night's council meeting, saying his commitment to transparency put him at odds with other councilors. The decision may stem from a disagreement over Indianapolis public schools. Last week, Brown called out 3 fellow Democratic councilors for pushing the district to share more resources with charter schools. In a letter after he was ejected from the Caucus, Brown said, "My constituents deserve fully funded, fully public education." A statement from the Democratic Caucus says Brown's actions and accusations do not align with caucus principles. Brown will keep his seat on the council. Last year, families of medically complex children found themselves at the center of the Family and Social Services Administration's response to the 2023 Medicaid forecasting error. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports a House committee approved legislation that could provide more transparency as the agency makes changes to an important Medicaid waiver.
The bill's author says FSSA is expected to request changes to the health and wellness waiver later this year. This bill would require the agency to present a report to an advisory council that specifically highlights any information related to the structured family caregiving program or possible reimbursement for family caregivers providing attendant care. It does not require any changes. Jennifer DeWitt is with Indiana Families United for Care. She says she is often the only one able to provide the care her son needs, which has cost her 3 jobs.
I am the absolute best person to care for him, but I, like many families, feel forgotten. We feel like most people in government have no comprehension of the sheer amount of work managing a very medically complex child is.
DeWitt says it is important that families of medically complex children have a seat at the table as these issues are being discussed by the state. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Abigail Ruman.
The bill now heads to the full House for consideration. A bipartisan group of lawmakers and faith leaders gathered Monday at the Statehouse to rally support for a measure to repeal Indiana's death penalty. The bill's author, Representative Bob Morris, says there is a growing support from his colleagues.
Many of my colleagues continue to come to my desk and stop by my office to continue to have the discussion of ending capital punishment.
Demetrius Minor is the national manager for Conservatives Concerned. He says the death penalty flies in the face of Republican values.
If we don't trust the government to deliver our mail on time, why would we trust the government with our life?
The measure hasn't received a committee hearing yet, but 15 House Democrats signed a letter in support of Morris's bill. And for our final story today, Hoosier homeowners have faced surging property tax bills in recent years. Governor Mike Braun wants to cap those increases, but there's a cost. From WFYI's education desk, Rachel Fredette reports that Indiana school systems rely on that money.
3 central Indiana school districts would lose the most under the Republican tax plan. Hamilton Southeastern schools would lose more than $82 million across 3 years. Carmel Clay schools and Indianapolis public schools would lose almost as much. Governor Braun says school districts who say they need a stream of property tax revenue to survive should prove it.
Prove it that you didn't salt away a lot, that you didn't overburden the taxpayer by maybe making investments in buildings that weren't needed or other things that weren't essential.
Indiana school districts would lose more than $1.9 billion under the current tax plan. The proposal is likely to face significant debate before it is finalized. I'm Rachel Fredette.
The legislative session must be wrapped before the end of April. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin and Zach Bundy, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.